Early on a frigid morning in late February 1944, at the Rechlin test center, the beating heart of the Luftwaffe's aviation engineering, a group of German officers and engineers gathered around a strange aircraft recently brought back from the front. It was a P-51B Mustang fighter, remarkably intact after making an emergency belly landing near the Hungarian border. This rare prize was an unexpected gift for the German engineering corps men who had spent months racking their brains for ways to counter the wave of American aircraft flooding Germany's skies. As each panel was removed and every system from the Merlin engine and aerodynamic wings to the fuel tanks and radio gradually revealed itself, the team was drawn into a world of engineering far beyond anything they had imagined. One engineer exclaimed, "If we had this in 1940, everything would have been different." No intelligence report or analytical memo was needed. The cold metal before them held the answer to a question that had haunted them for months. How had the US Air Force managed to dominate the skies over Europe, tightening the noose around the Third Reich day by day? The answer lay right there in the sleek lines, blistering speed, and near unlimited range of the warhorse named Mustang. Before that Mustang ever appeared inside the hangar at Rechlin, it, and hundreds of others like it, had already struck fear into the skies of Europe every single day. During World War II, the European skies became a brutal battlefield between Allied and Axis aircraft. The US and British Air Forces launched strategic bombing campaigns deep into Germany, hoping to destroy its industry and will to fight. But by 1943, the daytime flying B-17 and B-24 flying fortresses were suffering heavy losses without long-range fighter escort. Early British and American fighters like the Spitfire or P-47 Thunderbolt had limited range. They could only escort bomber formations to the edge of German airspace before having to turn back to refuel. Once the fighter escorts withdrew, Luftwaffe, German Air Force, interceptor groups would immediately swoop in and mow down the bomber formations. Bomber squadron losses sometimes reached 40% on a single sortie. In October 1943, the tragedy of Black Thursday at Schweinfurt unfolded. 291 unescorted flying fortresses were sent, and 77 were shot down or heavily damaged in just one day. Clearly, if no solution was found, the daytime bombing campaign would not be able to continue. At the end of 1943, a turning point came when the US Air Force deployed a new fighter, the P-51 Mustang, equipped with the Merlin engine. With its long range and high ceiling, the P-51 quickly changed the situation in the skies. It could fly deep into German territory, escorting the flying fortresses both to and from targets without needing to turn back early as before. The German Air Force soon realized just how formidable this new opponent was. Their seasoned fighter pilots, who once leisurely picked off bombers, now had to face an aerial warrior every bit as lethal as their own Bf 109 seconds, or few 190 seconds. Walter Wolfram, a Luftwaffe ace with 137 kills, bitterly admitted, "The P-51 was a completely different story. It could do everything our planes could, but much better. Unless viewed from the side, it looked just like a mere 109, which cost us dearly from the start. We saw their silhouettes, thought they were friendly, and then those damned no-mark bastards tore us to shreds. We didn't like the Mustang one bit." The arrival of the P-51 signaled the downfall of the German Air Force in its own skies. With its superior range and high-altitude combat capability, the P-51 not only escorted B-17 seconds all the way to Berlin and back, but also actively hunted down German interceptors right over their homeland. Mustang squadrons appeared like frontier gunslingers, clearing the path for America's flying fortresses to bomb freely without fear of ambush. In just the first few months of 1944, the Mustang helped break down multiple elite Luftwaffe squadrons, forcing the Germans to shift tactics, even to develop jet aircraft in response. But all efforts came too late. The P-51 wasn't simply a fighter, it was the machine that broke Germany's grip on its own skies. And that was precisely what compelled the Germans to try to decipher this warhorse in the only way they still could, by dismantling it, bolt by bolt, blade by blade, system by system. The German Air Force had long desired to capture an intact Mustang, not for display or propaganda, but to understand why this plane was forcing even the Luftwaffe to retreat in their own homeland's skies. And then, like a gift from fate, the opportunity came in early 1944. One misty morning in mid-February, the P-51B Mustang, bearing serial number 42-103458, piloted by Lieutenant Thomas Todd, was forced to make an emergency landing in a field near the Hungarian border within Austrian territory. It hadn't been hit by enemy fire, nor had it crashed hard. The aircraft had simply strayed from formation and run out of fuel after a long escort mission. Todd was captured as a prisoner of war just a few hours later. But what caught the Germans' attention more than anything was the nearly intact Mustang lying motionless in the winter wheat field, its olive-drab paint dulled by the fog, and its American markings still clearly visible on both sides of the fuselage. The aircraft was immediately disassembled, its wings removed and frame secured, then transported by train to Rechlin, Germany's largest aviation test center. And there, the dissection began with an unusual level of excitement from engineers already familiar with all sorts of Allied war trophies. Each metal panel was removed, every steel frame, wire, bolt, and mechanical part carefully detached and labeled. The Packard Merlin V16503 engine, a perfect American-built copy of the British Rolls-Royce design, was taken out of the airframe with the utmost caution. They didn't even dare use the usual chain hoist. Instead, they placed a thick leather cushion beneath it to prevent scratches. Never before had a captured aircraft been treated with such near reverence. The German engineers' emotions that day inside the hangar were a strange blend of awe, envy, and admiration. "Never seen a frame this sturdy yet this light," one engineer murmured as he examined the wing's inner ribs. The Mustang's fuselage was made from 24ST aluminum alloy, a lightweight yet extremely durable material with flush rivets and smoothly curved joints. Under the aircraft's belly was a radiator system with a Meredith effect duct. Hot air from the coolant system wasn't merely vented, but actually produced additional thrust, an idea the Germans had only heard of in theory at the time. When they reached the wings, they lingered longer. The Mustang's wings were thin, sharp, and streamlined, designed around the principle of laminar-flow, something the Germans had also been researching but hadn't yet successfully implemented. When they placed the wing in the wind tunnel at Rechlin, they could hardly believe the results. Aerodynamic drag was 30–40% lower than that of a Bf-109G wing of similar size. One engineer couldn't hold back. "This isn't a fighter plane, it's a flying dagger." Then came the cockpit. They climbed in, tested every lever, turned every dial, and were nearly overwhelmed. The Mustang's cockpit was unlike any they'd ever seen. Spacious, airy, packed with instruments and conveniences, a modern VHF radio, onboard oxygen supply, auto-adjusting gyro gun sight, auxiliary fuel gauges, electronic compass. "You don't need a genius to fly this beast, just solid training, and it becomes an extension of your arm," one of them observed. After weeks of disassembly and analysis, the engineers began reassembling each component with absolute precision. Lightly damaged parts were replaced with handmade substitutes or salvaged from other captured American aircraft. Once completed, the Mustang was painted with black Balkenkreuz crosses on both sides of the fuselage and assigned the code T9+CK following Luftwaffe test aircraft conventions. Its original American olive-drab paint was left untouched, partly for identification, partly as a quiet reminder that this was not their creation, and so, the Mustang, once a symbol of American air power, now stood among the ranks of German aircraft, at least on paper. But for those who had taken it apart and put it back together, they knew the truth. They did not own it. They had only borrowed a glimpse of something greater, the truth that this was a machine beyond their reach, and that it was the very thing that had turned the skies of Europe against them. In the early months of 1944, the P-51 Mustang bearing the code T9+CK became the brightest star at Rechlin Airfield. Luftwaffe test pilots, long familiar with the Bf-109, W-190, and even captured Spitfires, now had something truly valuable to explore. They flew T-9 plus CK week after week at all altitudes, performing dozens of performance trials from level speed, turning radius, and altitude retention to emergency dives and escape maneuvers. The Mustang passed nearly every test with results beyond expectations, and often far superior to many of the Luftwaffe's frontline aircraft at the time. Most striking was its performance at high altitude, where most German fighters began to falter. The P-51B, with its Merlin V16503 engine and two-stage supercharger, retained powerful output above 8,000 meters, allowing it to stay with or even outpace German interceptors during battles near the operating ceiling of the B-17. One engineer described the Mustang as soaring like an eagle, yet maneuvering like a sparrow. By contrast, the DB605 engine on the Bf-109, though formidable at medium altitudes, showed serious shortcomings at higher elevations, a deadly flaw now that air combat often unfolded along steep vertical axes at high altitudes. Meanwhile, at Rechlin's wind tunnel, engineer Adolf Bussmann, one of Germany's leading aerodynamicists, was analyzing the Mustang's wing. The results astonished him. The P-51 wing employed a laminar-flow design with a long stretch of smooth airflow which drastically reduced drag. When compared directly with the wing of the FW-190A, the Mustang showed about 35% less aerodynamic drag under identical conditions, a staggering difference. In an internal memo, Bussmann wrote, "The structure of this wing is not merely modern, it is at least a generation ahead of our design philosophy." But aerodynamic efficiency wasn't everything. The Luftwaffe's technical staff was equally astonished by the details inside the engine and fuel systems. The special carburetor on the Merlin engine allowed it to maintain stable operation even during steep dives, something Bf-109 pilots were often cautious about, as their DB engines tended to cut out when diving sharply. In addition, the Meredith effect radiator system under the belly, seemingly just for cooling, actually generated extra thrust like a miniature jet chamber, making the Mustang not only immune to drag but even faster. These features stripped the German engineers of their usual pride, pushing them to admit that American aviation with British support had truly surpassed them in technological prowess. After a series of tests and evaluations, the T-9 plus CK was handed over to a special unit, the Versuchsverband des Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, the experimental squadron under the Luftwaffe High Command. Led by Hauptmann Theodor Ted Rosarius, this unit operated captured Allied aircraft for training, demonstration, and technical experimentation. With an inventory ranging from P-38 Lightning, P-47 Thunderbolt, and Spitfire to even a B-17 bomber, German troops jokingly but aptly dubbed it the Wanderzirkus Rosarius, the Rosarius Traveling Circus. The Mustang T-9 plus CK, now tamed, became one of the star performers of this circus. In the summer of 1944, it was flown in demonstrations at airfields across Germany, from Hanover-Wunstorf to Neuruppin, appearing in broad daylight not during air raid alerts, but to teach German troops how to confront it. At Neuruppin, even fighter pilots from the Hungarian Air Force, Germany's ally, got the chance to test fly the Mustang at combat altitudes, simulating dogfights against their own 190 seconds. One German pilot who witnessed a training session recalled, "That morning, the airfield was filled with every kind of Allied aircraft, P-51 seconds, P-47 seconds, Lightnings, even a B-17 lying quietly under the sun. All of them bore black crosses, parked beside our own planes. It was a sight one would expect only in dreams or nightmares." Indeed, the Rosarius Circus didn't just perform, they told the truth. That the enemy was now too powerful, too numerous, and too modern. For young Luftwaffe pilots who had never faced American fighters in real combat, witnessing a Mustang fly, hearing the roar of its Merlin engine overhead, was both a valuable lesson and a chilling experience. However, operating such a mixed fleet was a logistical nightmare. With no spare parts, no official manuals. Each aircraft was its own separate world. Mechanics had to Frankenstein components from other wrecks, repair systems by feel, and guess at operating specs. Engine oil, fuel, ammunition, none of it matched German standards. Yet somehow, Rosarius managed to keep the circus flying for over a year until the final days of the war. And throughout that time, T9 plus CK, the first Mustang to wear German markings, kept flying. A strange symbol of Luftwaffe's admiration, tinged with helplessness, for an opponent that had slipped beyond their grasp. Alongside the T9 plus CK, the Luftwaffe didn't stop at having just one Mustang in their hands. In less than half a year, they managed to capture several more, each with its own story, and each offering another glimpse into the adversary they were desperately trying to keep up with. Most notable was the P-51B, serial number 43-24825, nicknamed Jerry, belonging to the 334th Fighter Squadron of the U.S. 4th Air Force. On the 6th of June 1944 D-Day, the day Allied forces stormed Normandy, Jerry lost formation in poor weather, became disoriented, and ran out of fuel. The pilot was forced to belly land in a field near Cambrai, northern France, just as the area was still under German control. Ironic indeed, on the very day the US launched its campaign to liberate Europe, a Mustang ended up as a pristine war prize in the hands of the Wehrmacht. The Germans wasted no time. The aircraft was transferred to Rechlin and tested just like the T9 plus CK before it. After inspection and tuning, it was repainted with the code T9 plus HK and officially joined the Rosarius Circus. The nickname Jerry now carried an even more bitter irony. Jerry was American slang for German soldiers, and now Jerry had quite literally become German, bearing the black Balkenkreuz and flying across German airfields for training purposes. T9 plus HK quickly became a familiar face at frontline demonstration airfields. Luftwaffe and Axis pilots alike watched the Mustang in flight, simulated dogfights, and analyzed its strengths and weaknesses. But Jerry's fate was not a smooth one. At the end of 1944, during a test flight, the aircraft suffered a serious technical failure and crashed. Test pilot Oblet Leo Potocznik was killed instantly. A tragic end for a Mustang that had survived numerous combat missions with the US, only to fall victim to a mechanical failure under German hands. In addition to the P-51Bs, the Luftwaffe also captured several of the newer P-51D variants, easily recognized by their improved bubble canopies offering superior all-around visibility. The P-51D featured a refined fuselage, more powerful machine guns, and upgraded electronics compared to earlier versions. Among them, at least one was coded T9 plus PK and used for high-altitude test flights, where the Mustang demonstrated impressive stability. This particular aircraft retained its unpainted bare metal finish, a detail that caught the attention of German engineers, as it reduced weight and improved speed. To the Luftwaffe, it reflected a kind of cold-blooded pragmatism in design thinking that they had never seriously considered. Although the total number of Mustangs captured by Germany was not large, estimated at only a handful throughout the war, their value was undeniable. Each time one was dismantled, each test flight, each direct encounter with American technology brought the Luftwaffe a step closer to the truth about the ever-widening gap between the two sides. The Germans tried to devise counter-strategies, from altering interception altitudes and improving high-altitude flak to organizing aerial guerrilla formations. But battlefield reality was always harsher than anything they could simulate at Rechlin. The Mustang wasn't just powerful on paper, it had numbers, reliability, and stability under extreme conditions, things the Luftwaffe was increasingly unable to counter. These Buta Mustangs war prizes repainted with German markings may have helped the Luftwaffe better understand their opponent, but they could not change the glaring truth. The game had slipped out of their hands. And those P-51 seconds bearing the black cross, still flying in German skies, were merely spectral reflections of a force that was rapidly overpowering them from above. By mid-1944, Air superiority in Europe had definitively tilted in favor of the Allies. The P-51 Mustang became the spearhead, not just escorting B-17 seconds but actively hunting down German fighters over their own homeland. During Big Week in February 1944, in just 1 week, the U.S. Air Force knocked nearly 1/5 of the Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots out of the fight, a loss that could never be replaced. Ace pilot Walther Dahl bitterly admitted, "All we had left were eager young men joining squadrons, but almost none had real combat experience." From then on, the Mustang ruled the skies. By June 1944, just before D-Day, the Luftwaffe had fewer than 80 fighters on the French front, facing more than 6,000 Allied aircraft. That overwhelming disparity left the Germans nearly blind in the air, utterly helpless in the face of the largest amphibious invasion in history, as Hermann Göring would later bitterly confess. "When I saw Mustangs flying over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." Faced with the growing threat of the Mustang, the Luftwaffe was forced to struggle for a way out, not just through weaponry, but with fundamental changes in strategy. Adolf Galland, commander of the fighter force, knew they could no longer rely on skill to make up for numbers. He immediately pushed on 2 fronts, accelerating the development of next-generation aircraft and completely overhauling interception tactics, focusing on breaking up bomber formations from afar before the Mustangs could close the skies. On the technological front, Germany's strongest counterblow came in the form of a jet-powered machine with wings, the Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwalbe. Introduced into service in July 1944, it was the world's first operational jet fighter and one of the very few aircraft capable of outpacing the Mustang in pure speed. With a top velocity of 870 km per hour, the Me-262 could tear through B-17 formations in seconds and vanish before P-51 escorts could close in. However, despite its advanced technology, the Me-262 arrived too little, too late. Just weeks after their first missions, these jets were ambushed by Mustang pilots near airfields. Captain Joseph Myers of the U.S. 8th Air Force once described hitting a plane that looked like an A-20 but moved terrifyingly fast. It was, in fact, a Me-262. Soon, the P-51 seconds were assigned to hunt down German jets, especially during takeoff and landing when the Me-262 was at its most vulnerable. Jet ace Heinz Baer bitterly remarked, "We ruled the skies for about 30 seconds. Then, we had to scramble for cover because the Mustangs were already waiting." Germany didn't stop at the Me-262. It launched other ambitious projects like the Me-163 Comet, a rocket-powered interceptor capable of nearly 1,000 km per hour. On paper, it was a nightmare for bomber formations. In reality, the Me-163 was a deadly risk to its own pilots. Flammable fuel, unstable cockpits, and unsafe takeoffs and landings in most cases. Meanwhile, the familiar Bf-109 seconds and W-190 seconds were forced to carry the brunt of combat, requiring constant upgrades to withstand the Mustang's overwhelming edge. The Bf-109G K series was equipped with stronger engines and heavier weaponry. The Pu-190A8 was reinforced with armor and firepower, transformed into the Sturmbock version, a true battering ram designed to crash into U.S. bomber formations. Galland organized Sturmgruppe elite assault squadrons with the suicidal mission of destroying B-17 groups, escorted by high-flying Bf-109 seconds to hold off Mustangs. At times, the tactic produced horrifying results. On the 7th of July 1944, Sturmgruppe 4, JG-3 Udet, downed 23 B-24 seconds in just 2 minutes. But those fleeting flashes of success came at a devastating cost. The heavy, sluggish Sturmbocks became easy prey for the Mustangs. One German officer later admitted, "We knew we had no chance. The armor only bought us a few more seconds before being torn apart." The situation grew so dire that, near the end of the war, Germany began deploying suicide squadrons known as Sonderkommando Elbe, young pilots flying unarmed light aircraft, ordered to ram directly into B-17 seconds, sacrificing themselves in the most literal sense to destroy the enemy. It was no longer a tactic, it was desperation. By late 1944, the skies over Germany were virtually no longer theirs. Every technical effort, every new tactic, was like patching a sinking ship. The Mustang still ruled the skies, and the Luftwaffe no longer had enough men, fuel, or planes left to resist. Lieutenant General Galland, once hopeful about jets and tactical reform, bitterly admitted, "We lost before we could even take off. My pilots wanted to fly, but they had no fuel, no decent aircraft, and 10 Mustangs were already circling overhead." That lament, though dramatic, reflected reality. The Luftwaffe didn't lose for lack of trying, it lost because the enemy had reached an entirely different level. And so, standing in the cold technical hangar, facing each component disassembled from the captured Mustang, the German engineers finally found their answer, but it came too late. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just a fighter, it was the embodiment of an industrial capability, a design philosophy, and a logistics system that wartime Germany could no longer hope to match. With its exceptional range and astonishing performance, the Mustang became the long arm of America's flying fortresses, carrying the war into the very heart of the Reich. Despite the Luftwaffe's brilliant minds, its skilled pilots, and its desperate innovations, they no longer had the time, fuel, or manpower to reverse the tide. They could dismantle the Mustang, measure every part, record every specification. But what truly made the aircraft successful, from large-scale production systems and flexible supply chains to a holistic design ethos, could not be replicated in those final months. Perhaps, as they stared at the scattered Mustang wreckage across the Rechlin hangar floor, the German engineers silently understood. The skies over Europe were no longer theirs. The dominance once wielded by the Bf-109 and Fw-190 at the war's outset had quietly shifted westward, carried away by the distinctive roar of the Merlin engine, echoing from the heights where Mustangs now roamed. It was thanks to those war horses of the sky that the Allies finally pierced the last steel shell surrounding the Third Reich with bombs, with speed, and with overwhelming industrial superiority. Hermann Göring, who once arrogantly declared the Luftwaffe to be an invincible force, was ultimately forced to bow his head and admit defeat. When I saw Mustangs flying over Berlin, I knew the war was over. It wasn't just the end of a chapter in history, it was a lesson that still echoes to this day. In war, the victor isn't merely the one with the stronger weapons, but the one who sees further and acts sooner. The Germans came to understand the Mustang all too well, but far too late. And by the time they realized it, the skies had already changed hands.